Welcome back to the panel discussion, Identity and Access Management, a top priority for states in 2019, sponsored by HID Global on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. My guests today are Todd Kimbrell, Deputy Executive Director, Department of Information Resources and Chief Information Officer for the state of Texas, Rajid Rao, Chief Technology Officer, Office of Information Technology Services for the state of New York, and Doug Robinson, Executive Director, NASCIO, National Association of State Chief Information Officers, and lastly, Jerry Cox, Director of Business Development at HID Global. I'm your moderator, John Thomas Flynn. When we left just a minute ago, we were talking about the federal compliance rules and regulations, and Doug, you were mentioning a little bit about how the interpretation is more different a little bit than I may have explained it earlier. Would you clarify that?
It's different in terms of the interpretation. We started discussing about NIST 853 in terms of the federal cybersecurity guidance from NIST, and the federal agencies get to interpret that differently in terms of their build out of security for those systems. The states partner with the federal government. They're the agents for change in terms of federal programs, and obviously there's an impact on that. So they must comply, and the two most visible ones really are around IRS 1075, which is Federal Tax Information IRS, and then CJIS, which is the FBI CJIS, which is again around criminal history records and law enforcement records. They have different interpretations of the same set of outcomes, and their controls are different in terms of the compliance. So that's what causes challenge. So our advocacy ask, so to speak, our advocacy agenda for the last 3 years from NASCIO, our primary one from the federal government is, can you sit down and can we work on harmonizing those? We've mapped to 200 separate controls to show where there are essentially commonalities, but most importantly, there are differences among those. Generally, there's 85% agreement, but they're interpreted differently by each federal agency, and therefore the audit findings are different. A quick example for things like everybody's familiar with lockout on invalid passport attempts. Well, so IRS, their lockout policy is 3. After 3 lockouts, after 3 invalid attempts at your passport, you're locked out for 15 minutes. FBI CJIS is 5. So after 5 unsuccessful attempts, you're locked out. The same outcome is preventing unauthorized access to systems. Why can't we simply do that? Because again, that results in audit findings and adverse audit findings on the federal side. So there's a significant associated cost, both in personnel, time, most importantly in audits. And so the states, a small state may spend 1,000 hours dealing with audits from 15 different agencies, all for the same set of security controls. So that's what we've asked for. We met with Suzette Kett from Federal CIO and OMB this morning. We also met with both representatives from IRS Safeguards and from FBI CJIS on a roundtable discussion for an hour and a half to, again, continue discussions about how can we advance this harmonization effort and get the federal agencies to sit down. We hope that will be prompted by this GAO report that is now being wrapped up, and it'll be a set of GAO findings that will essentially recommend that the federal agencies get together and try to reduce the points of pain for their state partners.
Rajiv, I was going to say, I know there's an interesting topic, crucial topic, that is the opioid crisis. Governor Cuomo was out in front of that issue in many respects, and I know that New York has done some work on that, about the whole issue of authenticating prescriptions. I think all the states have to have it done by 2020.
Yeah, I'm not too certain that we have made that much progress where we can really start talking or make an announcement about it, but the foundation is there now where we can start to launch these programs and get that mandate covered. So it's work in progress. We're not fully there yet. Identity, we have a mature identity system, but as time goes by, compliance requirements keep growing, and adding those changes becomes an expensive proposition, and it takes time. Because not only do you have to put those in place, you then have to validate that all the legacy systems that are using identity as a service continue to work. Because otherwise it's just a complete stop and halt to business, which is detrimental to what we're trying to accomplish, which is provide redundancy and robust services.
Jerry, did you want to mention something about CJIS?
So a couple of interesting things. So Doug was talking about controls and trying to get those harmonized because we've got different requirements from different agencies. In terms of identity, whether it be for CGIS or for EPCS, electronically prescribing controlled drugs, there are also different requirements, and it actually compounds it, right? So for EPCS, there's a requirement coming as part of the Cures Act, where every state must prescribe electronically if they want to be reimbursed by CMS. So the requirement there is that the people be identity proof to a certain level in accordance with NIST standards. They have to have multi-factor authentication at a certain level in accordance with NIST standards. For CGIS, there is also a multi-factor authentication rule where if an officer has a laptop in a car, not in a secured area, there's multi-factor authentication required there. The requirements are different, right? From FBI, Center of Justice Information Systems, to the DEA's requirements for EPCS. So it's not just controls, it's identity, multi-factor authentication. It compounds. So we touch on a lot of that stuff in the company that I work for. So we're quite familiar with the problems. I'm literally working with police departments every single day on those kinds of problems, as well as with EHR and EMR vendors to help solve that problem for EPCS. So,
You know, this may sound counterintuitive, but do states ever put compliance rules and regulations in force against the federal government for anything?
You've stumped the panel.
I guess I have. I would think you'd have some databases that are, well, I'll give you an example. How about elections databases? You know, the federal government tried to get access to federal databases, which they probably could have done themselves, but remember that Pence Commission asked for databases of voters, and they were denied it, I guess. It'd come right out of it. You learn, see, that's why you come to a panel like this. You learn something. It's not just me getting all this information.
John, you know it's a funding. It's like we hand you the bag of money, but underneath we have the pulling the strings. So, I mean, the states recognize that, and I think we just have to. We need to flip the script a little bit about more collaboration around some of these opportunities, because what we have found certainly in the last 15 years, as NASCIO has been advocating for the states, is the glacial movement of the policy framework around financial accounting, cost allocation models, the audit process, is that the states are moving and have been moving quickly towards a more consolidated, unified. They're rationalizing their applications. They're moving into, and certainly our two state representatives can talk about that movement. That has to be recognized by the federal policy folks, and that we have to have flexibility. Move to cloud services, move to virtualization, move to consolidated data centers. So they're used to dealing with the individual programs, and they're all coalescing, and they're being operated by the state CI organization in many cases, and that causes challenges to kind of rationalize the compliance issue of the federal government against that, and effectively manage the cost allocation. As you know, the CIOs predominantly operate in a 100% chargeback model, and so they're using those federal funds, but the haven't modernized the recognition of that yet.
Yeah, a long-standing problem.
Yeah.
Todd?
Yeah, so I'll go back to that harmonization issue, and I think Doug just touched on a point that's really important. Harmonization is the first part. Getting all of the various standards and audit requirements consolidated so that we have sort of a single framework, the lowest common denominator, if you will, that everybody follows. But then beyond that, it's getting recognition of the fact that we do have these programs that are centralized. And if I've got 100 agencies that are going through a common shared program, it would be great if the federal government would audit the program once instead of auditing 50 agencies that operate in the same program, and it's the same audit over and over and over again, rather than just auditing the program one time and going, all of these agencies in this program have now complied with 70% of the audit requirements. Now they can go individually and just do 30% on the individual agencies. But that's a place that really would be very beneficial for the states.
You know, it's funny you say that. It reminds me of back when I used to work for the Pentagon about the single audit. Remember that, Doug? There was a single audit that kind of was supposed to do what you talked about doing, but it was too good an idea, and it went away, you know?
There is the states, a statewide single audit exists today, but it's financial. It doesn't deal with the it's financial audit.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, anyway, let's switch over now to citizen access, which I think sometimes is a little more interesting for the folks at home, but also because it has so many different ramifications. Now, I remember in '93 in Massachusetts, Dave Lewis, our friend Dave Lewis, was the CIO for DMV, later became state CIO, I believe. Anyway, we started the first internet access, signed a contract, and he wanted to allow people to register their cars over the internet back in the early '90s. And then it was a very well-intentioned effort, and it went well. And of course, other agencies, not only in Massachusetts but around the country, copied it. Now that's all well and good, but all of a sudden, when you had to have a different login password for every one of these different agencies, it became very clear that it called for that enterprise approach we talked about. And I think you were saying, Rajiv, that that's one of the things that New York is trying to do.
Yeah, we're focused on that right now. We're kind of investing heavily in identity, not only for single sign-on or better user experience, but also to enhance the protocols that we support in authentication. As the industry moves forward, our identity store needs to keep up and provide those elevated levels of multi-factor, like we were mentioning, and all the other protocol channels for mobile access, and all of those things have to be accounted for when you provide identity as a service, because otherwise the applications will tend to be legacy, monolithic, traditional 3-tier type of thing, which is not where the industry is going. In this day where people like to use their phones to do their business transactions, and have this idea that 2 clicks gets them anything. Why does it take them 50 steps to get a renewal of an existing service from the state? It just kind of dissuades them as to where we are with what we're providing them.
Yeah. So Todd, back to your letting the agencies do their own approach. Are you still going to have some kind of an enterprise identity login, or are you going to get around that somehow?
Actually, yeah, we are for citizens. So we started this initiative about 4 years ago. We call it My Government, My Way. And the idea is, philosophically, we want to shift the paradigm of how agencies deliver services to citizens in Texas. And today, every agency has that sort of blinders on of how they deliver services to their constituents. In reality, we want to flip that 180 degrees and have everybody look at how does the citizen consume those services. And so we're building out a portal. We're going to leverage, we go through a third-party, identity proofing process, leveraging biometrics and facial recognition. And once we've created an account, we're actually going to use a global unique ID, which is a large, string that's unique to each citizen that opts in to create their account. And then we'll use that number to send it off to the individual agencies so that they can append that number into their core systems. So it minimizes the impact on agencies, so they don't have to do a lot of work, but it gives us the ability to sort of create a pseudo golden record of a citizen without really anybody owning that record. Now, and that number would not be visible to the citizen, so it's unlike a driver's license number or a vehicle renewal or things like that. And we're very hopeful, anxious that this first release will be very well received.
Okay. Jerry, what about citizen access? What's the industry looking at and trending toward?
The citizen access is really interesting. It's got to be easy for citizens, right? So first of all, citizens need options, right? They don't want a state or a government forcing, some authentication gizmo down their throat, whether it be an electronic driver's license or a token or saying they have to authenticate by mobile. So key, I think, is allowing citizens to self-enroll, let them opt in, and give them choices. Right, so some state agencies may accept maybe a password and a fingerprint. Others might accept password and maybe they have a Bluetooth device on them. Maybe it's a watch, right, that just maintains a Bluetooth connection, but it shows that they are who they are and they have something. Right, so easy two-factor authentication. So it depends a lot, I think, for citizens on what it is that they're accessing, right, the level of controls that are needed. And then also on what the citizens are willing to utilize. But that choice thing, I think, is very important for citizens.
So Jerry, that's spot on. That's exactly right. Citizens expect an experience from their government that exceeds that they realize today from the retail world, the commercial world. And we've seen studies that clearly demonstrate that they expect that type of performance from their government.
To add to Todd's comment earlier, our identity platform is now being pivoted to be citizen-centric. what we're trying to do is build personas for citizens. So when we know that a citizen does business with the state, they do business with 15 or 16 agencies. There is no reason why we cannot correlate that information to provide them better experience or in just-in-time service. While they're on there doing something, they could be prompted to do other things that are coming up due in short notice. That not only makes it efficient for them, it also makes it efficient for the agencies as well, because now rather than having to send these notices and things like that, you're being more proactive in providing citizen services. You're renewing your driver's license. Maybe you had got a license for your boat last year, and it's a gentle prompt to say, hey, do you want to renew that as well for this season? Or you're getting a fishing or a hunting license, maybe we can prompt you for that as well. It's all based on understanding the persona of the citizen and understanding the business they do with the state. And that all comes from being able to have a single identity platform where you can start to build that. So to your point of the golden record, once you have that, you can start to attach all these business intelligences to it to then help be more proactive with your citizen services.
Okay. We're going to have to take a little break right now. We'll come back to this. I know Doug wanted to weigh in. I'm your moderator, John Thomas Flynn, on the panel discussion, Identity and Access Management, a top priority for states in 2019, sponsored by HID Global on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.